process of writing this book was really, it wrote itself. And at the same time that I'm saying that, I kind of realised how strange, that might sound, but it's as an accurate description as I can give. I would say that it absolutely wrote itself. There might be a few kind of what I'm going to call, in inverted commas, personal touches in it. If I reread it myself, I might come across something and think, oh yeah, that was kind of my character sort of came through there very definitely. But no, it just kind of wrote itself. I think I can't really say anything much about that other than the same thing, that, there was just an energy emerged to write it. I have the character or the personality of a communicator, if you like. It's what I like doing. All my adult life, it's how I earned my living, was by communicating, not by writing, but I was a lecturer, facilitator, teacher, trainer, that sort of thing. So it's just natural to this character that whenever an enthusiasm for something emerges here for whatever reason, I have an urge, or there's also an urge emerging to communicate it. It's remarkably easy because nothing writes about itself. So I think I really have to say, if there's anything difficult about it, that probably results in no writing happening. So if something, as far as I'm concerned, if something about non-duality gets written, it was probably very easy. I mean, nothing's changed in essence. I mean, it's possible that that something's, obviously something might get refined or changed in the language, or the concepts are used and it may become clearer, or indeed, as time goes on, it may become more muddled and confused. That's also possible. But I'd say no, in terms of the, and I mean, I notice I'm even resisting the word message, but I'll use it. In terms of the message or the meaning, let's make it a bit more neutral. In terms of the meaning, no, nothing's changed. And in terms of deepening, I have no idea what that means. I mean, to me, deepening is a word that I could only apply to experience. And experience is constantly changing. It's the nature of experience, and it's always changing. So sometimes experience may be deepening, and sometimes experience may be shallowing. And I expect I've just invented a word there, but perhaps it's a word we need. Experience is always changing. No experience lasts for more than a second or two, or maybe a few seconds. So if there's an experience of deepening, that's great, that's fine, but that's probably something that's happening on an emotional level or a psychological level. Nothing wrong with that, but I can't make sense of it in terms of what's written about or spoken about where non-duality is concerned. It's about non-duality, obviously. There you go. I could just stop there and make it simple. There was an impulse to write a little bit, but only a very, very tiny bit, about my my story, if you like. How I came to be writing a book about non-duality, if you like, how I came to be involved with this strangeness called non-duality. I think that's about all I can say. Well, it was something, I've told this story many times, it was something that Tony Parsons said to me at the end of one of his talks. I used to go to Tony's talks and ask lots and lots of agonised questions, and sometimes I'd phone him up in my agony, and sometimes I'd talk to him before and after the meetings, and perhaps in the tea break. And at the end of one meeting, I sort of went up to him both to thank him for the meeting and to share a little bit more of my agony with him. very generous of me to share my agony, and he gave me a warm hug and he said, "I hope you die soon." And I mean, in the context of non-duality, I think I know what he meant by that. It's a bit incautious of me to interpret what somebody else said, because they might contradict me. But I think I know what he meant by that, and I think he just meant that somehow it would be nice if this agony ended. You know, if the non-existence of the person was recognised and this agony ended. I think that's what he meant by that. But it's a title that has caused some puzzlement amongst people who don't really recognise very much what non-duality is about. I've had some very strange interpretations of the title, which I don't think I'm going to share in public. No one dies because there is no one in the first place, but we could say, I mean, this is obviously metaphor, but we could say that what dies is the illusion that there is a separate person. I was going to say, the reason I paused there, because I was going to say that what dies is the idea that there's a separate person, but it's much more than an idea. It's like a felt sense. There's this phrase from a psychotherapeutic intervention called focusing, this made up noun, felt sense, which really kind of encompasses more than just the feelings we have about something and more than just the thoughts we have about something. It's like the totality of whatever the something is. And there is, for most of us, definitely a something called the sense of being an individual person, or the sense of being a separate person. So it's that sense that dies. So the hope in the title is that the sense of being a separate person, the sense of separation, will die. Even though it's an illusion, it's a very, very convincing illusion. So the hope is that that illusion will end. There can seem to be an apparent process, and in that apparent process, there seems to be common stages. I'm very much emphasizing seems to be. I don't want to make too much of this. But in terms of having a conversation between people, say you and me, or a group of people who are interested in this, one of the common characteristics is that when an interest in what we're talking about arises, there can seem to be a stage in which hope is lost. Right? There seems to be a stage of hopelessness. And one of the chapters in the book I remember is called The Great Mantra. And yes, the Great Mantra is something like helpless, hopeless. I don't think I can remember the third term.
Meaningless.
Helpless, thank you. It was years ago I wrote it. Helpless, hopeless and meaningless. So it just seems to be a kind of a common experience. When I say common, I don't by any means mean universal, but fairly common experience when there's a real fascination or an interest in non-duality, particularly when, in Ramana Maharshi's phrase, people find their heads in the tiger's mouth, that there can be an apparent stage where there is a sense of hopelessness or a sense of despair, where all hope is gone. And one of the points that I tried to make about that in this book is that may sound to the ordinary mind as terrible, but it's not terrible. You know, we have a lot in our culture that encourages us to feel that hope is a very good thing and despair is a very bad thing. And so that book challenges that in a way, because hope can be very tiring. As long as there's hope, you kind of have to keep working at stuff, and it can create a lot of tension, that can. And although despair is generally regarded as something to be avoided, actually what can happen when despair is really experienced is that a kind of relaxation can take place, a kind of giving up can take place, a kind of surrender can take place. Because in despair, if it's genuine despair, it can be seen that there really isn't anything that can be done. So in seeing that there isn't anything that can be done, then the doing of nothing might arise, and the doing of nothing can be very relaxing. So part of the purpose of maybe that section in the book, and perhaps a few other sections of the book and other things that I've written, is just to point out that we could reconsider the kind of cultural myths about hope and despair that most of us, you know, have picked up through our education and acculturation. Oh, hope's a very good thing and despair's terrible. Well, that can be challenged. If liberation, see, I think if liberation was to do with the mind, then we would, as it were, be able to think our way into it, which we most definitely can't. You know, as far as I'm concerned, liberation has nothing to do with the orientation of our mind in any way. You know, it has to do with, it's very tricky, because I'm talking about something that isn't real. So I also have to say liberation isn't real, but nevertheless we're having this conversation, so let's try and make sense of it. So in that context, I think, you know, liberation is, it's an, well, the phrase that's most often used, I'm not the only one by any means to use this phrase, is that it's an energetic shift. It's a change in the energy of this apparent person. It's a change, if you like, in the energy system of the apparent person or the character that's sitting here in a chair talking to you. It's not a mind shift. It's not a change of ideas. It may very well bring about a change of ideas, and it may very well bring about a change in certain functions of the mind and the way the mind works. But it is not in itself something which the mind can bring about. I'm going to complicate things a little bit more now by adding, and you and I, me more than you, are sitting here using this word mind. So just as a kind of caution, I'm going to add, and the mind doesn't even exist. So maybe there's a kind of simple way of understanding why liberation has nothing to do with the mind. It can't do, because the mind doesn't exist. You could say the mind's a figment of our imagination, but then please don't ask me what the imagination is. Well, we're talking about something that doesn't exist and doesn't occur. Nevertheless, nevertheless, I'm going to go back to that phrase, energy shift. That's what I'm going to do. So what's that energy shift about? Well, nobody can describe it, but I will try inadequately to say that, you know, there is a sense for most of us, most of the time, there's a sense of what is often called separation. And what, perhaps one of the easiest ways of describing that is there's a sense that kind of, I'm an individual kind of in here, I'm pointing to myself here, I'm in this body somehow, obviously I'm not the same as this body, but I occupy this, this place in space, if you like, or this place in space-time, and that everything else is separate from me, and everything else means an external world that I move through. So, if you like, that's a description of the common experience of duality. You know, duality means two things. What are those two things? Well, one of them is me, myself, the individual, and the other, separate from that, is everything else, the world through which I move, and that world contains objects and people and everything else. So I move through space-time. I move through space-time, which is separate from me. And if we're talking about awakening or liberation, to me, in a way, all we're talking about is the possibility of that sense of separation falling away, and then the recognition that there isn't any separation between this that seems to be aware of the external world than the external world that this seems to be aware of. They are not separate, they are one and the same thing. So there is only oneness rather than the duality of me in a separate world that there appears to be. Well, karma is it's an idea. You could say it's a philosophy if you like, and it's immensely appealing. It's immensely popular. You know, it appears in sort of different forms in different cultures, but it's really, really appealing because it suggests that there will be justice. And you could say, I would say, I suppose, maybe from an evolutionary point of view, we are very entranced by the idea of justice. We very much like the idea of justice. It's part of our socialization, if you like, as evolved beings. And yet we are affronted by the fact in life that there clearly isn't very much justice. You know, justice doesn't actually seem to exist, you know, very strongly. So that's a bit offensive to our desire for justice. And so what we do is we make up stories to make ourselves feel better. And those stories in some way or other say, well, there will be justice in the end. You know, they're ultimately, you might not be able to see it on a day-to-day level. You know, your horrible bullying employer is actually thriving quite nicely, so he's not getting the justice you think he deserves. So we make up stories that say that in spite of everyday appearances, there will be justice. I mean, these stories tend to be basically of one of two kinds. Either you have a kind of one shot at life followed by salvation or damnation, which is the kind of Judeo-Christian Abrahamic religion view. So that offers a kind of justice, because if my employer bullies me in this life, I can contemplate him going to hell, and then I can go to heaven, and there'll be a window in heaven through which I'll be able to look at my employer being roasted and toasted by demons. That's a kind of justice. And then, you know, the philosophers of karma offer the alternative view, which is that there will be rebirth. And in those rebirths, justice will eventually prevail. So in that version, my bullying employer perhaps will be reborn as a toad and will be eaten by a snake, something like that. I mean, I'm obviously giving a bit of a caricature here because we don't have 4 or 5 hours to talk about this, but I think that's probably sufficiently, you know, sufficiently clear. So karma is a delightfully attractive story for the mind because it seems to offer the promise that eventually justice will prevail. Well, it belongs as part of that story of meaning and justice and so forth. So my understanding of Dharma, and I'm sure there will be scholars out there who will maybe disagree or perhaps just put me right about this, but my idea is it's the idea, Dharma, that, you know, I have a kind of given path in life, let's say. There are things perhaps that I need to achieve in this lifetime. Lessons I need to learn, growth processes I need to go through. Again, this is a really charming and very, very attractive story. So in a sense, you could say, well, Dharma is, you know, my proper path through life, the path that I need to find that will most enhance my spiritual growth, perhaps. So anything that I do which is conducive to my Dharma is a good thing, and anything I do which takes me away from my Dharma is a bad thing and will interrupt my spiritual progress. These are absolutely delightful stories. It must be obvious. I mean, I was entranced by these stories for many, many years. I really was. You know, I really took the story of karma and Dharma very seriously. And part of the shock of, let's call it non-dual seeing. Yeah, might as well call it that. Part of the shock is to be confronted with these stories falling away. I mean, these stories are very comforting. I mean, don't forget another thing I've written and other people have written as well is that, you know, whatever we want to call it, awakening, liberation, seeing non-duality, whatever. It's not a gain. It's not, that's G-A-I-N, not G-A-M-E. It's not, I'm not saying it's not a gain, I'm saying it's not a gain. There is nothing to be gained from this. It's a loss. You know, it's a loss. And one of the losses is the loss of these really lovely, really delightful and very comforting stories. Like ultimately there is meaning, there is dharma, there is justice, there is karma. Well, the first thing I'd say is that probably, I would guess, the majority of people that come across this communication go away again pretty quickly without showing much interest in it. For those who haven't gone away yet, who are still listening to this interview, what's going on? What's going on is this. What's going on is just what's going on. I can, you know, what's going on? There's speaking happening, there are sounds, there's this picture of somebody apparently talking to me from Canada. What's going on, if you like, is in, I sometimes use the phrase, it's in the realm of the bleeding obvious. What's going on is this. What's going on is whatever is happening, the sound of a voice, the seeing of somebody on a screen, the feeling of an arse upon a leather chair, a hand waving about, the sound, perhaps the sense of something in the air. Maybe there's a scented candle burning. That's what's going on. That's what's real, if you like. What's real is whatever's happening, and whatever's happening is what's real. Well, you could say that what happens before and after may be exactly the same thing. There may be no change at all, except that what happens before seems to be happening for a person, and what is happening after is seen not to be happening for a person. We could put it like that. So there may be changes, there may not be. As I've just said, there are certain experiences which don't tend to arise once this has been seen. Boredom's one of them, I would say. Depression is another one. I was giving a talk once and somebody in the room said, oh, and loneliness, and that made sense as well. Loneliness doesn't tend to happen. Could do, any of these things could do, but they don't tend to. So really, it's not so much that there's a change in what happens, it's more simply that what happens is seen or is known no longer to be happening for anyone. You could say, if you like, it's known to be happening of its own accord. And that might sound, I don't know if that sounds quite a small or trivial difference, but it's not, it's huge. I feel like saying it's the only difference that matters. I would say it's impossible to want it because it can't be conceived what it is. So if, like I was, I was a very, very sincere seeker after this magical thing called enlightenment, which I had all sorts of illusions and ideas about. But what this is, I mean, it can't really be sought after because it can't be known what it is. So there can be a kind of an energy and an impulse, which, for example, we find our feet walking towards a meeting house where there's a non-duality talk going on, and an interest has arisen in this for some reason, or maybe even a fascination. But the mind can't really know at all what it's about. It's part of the mysteries that, we can become absolutely fascinated by this and indeed addicted to it, and yet the mind can only have wrong ideas about it. Well, we could cut through that, if you like. Instead of saying that, we can ignore that. We just say there's no person. There seems to be a person, in there and in here, but there's no person. So it's not even a question of there's no free choice. We can ignore that. You know, there's no person to exercise free will. It's very simple. Leave it at that if we want to. Of course, we might also acknowledge that this is just about the most offensive thing that can possibly be said to a person or to someone who feels that they are a person. I mean, the two most offensive things you can say is, you know, that you're not a person, there's no such thing, and there's no such thing as free will. What do you mean there's no such thing as free will? You know, look, I'm putting up my hand. Yeah, in fact, I'm going to put it up like that because you've just told me there's no free will. Don't tell me there's no free will. I just chose to do that. It's so offensive. It can get people so angry so quickly. I feel like there's almost no point in saying anything to that other than, you know, when it happens, it will be known. I was going to say when it happens, you will know, which is the natural way of speaking. When it happens, it will be known. Beyond that, I mean, there's no point. I mean, I'm not trying to argue anybody into this. I'm not trying to persuade anybody. It is quite like free will. You know, it has to be recognized that as long as there's a feeling of free will there, then that feeling's there. As long as there's a feeling of separation of a separate person who has the freedom to make decisions and make choices. So as long as that's there, it's there. There's no point particularly arguing against it. I wouldn't want to waste my time or anybody else's time doing that. All I can say is, and when this is seen, it's seen. As Tony sometimes says, you know, when it happens, phone me up. I would say, again, you see, if it's just an idea or a thought, then it's pretty easy to get rid of, and it's quite clear that it's not pretty easily get rid of. It's like the sense of free will. I quoted this before. You know, free will can be dismantled, if you like, on different levels. It can be dismantled philosophically. It can be shown not to exist through experiments, you know, through the new neuroscientific experiments and so forth. It can be directly seen that there's no person and therefore no free will in a non-dual awakening. And yet, if the sense of free will is there, it's there. And the philosopher Galen Strawson puts this very, very clearly. He says, I know there's no possibility of free will, but that's not what I feel when I walk down the street. I mean, I'm paraphrasing him, but that's pretty much what he means. And now I've lost the question again. I think it was about the person, wasn't it? It's not an idea. It's not a thought. It's the simplest. Maybe it's not particularly clear, but the clearest way to put it is it's an energy. It's this energy of contraction. It's this energy of contraction. And as long as it's there, it will seem real. And when it's gone, it's gone. And then when it's gone, these kind of conversations can cease. Because it's just known then. Yes. Next question. Yes. There is a difference, right? There is a difference. So they are the same, and there's a difference. A sort of psychological or philosophical difference. I'm not sure which. You know, the difference is that when we're asleep, it's believed that there's a difference. And it might also be believed that that difference is very important, right? When we're awake, it's known that there is no difference. So, you know, you could say, okay, this is an argument which destroys itself. I've just said there is no difference and prove that there is one. But it's a notional difference. in the sense that it really does, it really is in the notion, right? The notion when I'm asleep, and I hope we know what we mean by that, and I believe that there is something called being awake or liberation or enlightenment or whatever, which is this special state, then there will be a very strong sense that there is a difference, and my life might revolve around my desire to discover what that difference is. And part of the shock in awakening is the recognition, oh, that was all wrong. That was completely wrong. No, there's no difference at all. No, and I think you quoted this before, so we go back to probably the best known Zen sayings of all, you know, before enlightenment shot wood, after enlightenment shot wood. That's what that statement means. There is no difference. I don't know whether, I mean, it's a metaphor. I don't know if it's a good metaphor or not in consideration after many years. I mean, because what I meant by that is it's the hardest one to give up. It's the hardest addiction to give up. And the reason I'm saying, well, I'm not sure that it's that good a metaphor is because, of course, you know, we can't give it up. The person that is trying to give up the addiction to being a person doesn't actually exist. In the sense that the I does not exist. Language works in such a way as to reinforce the sense of the I a great deal in common speech. I mean, that's not where the sense of the I comes from. You do get this strange phenomenon sometimes when people become interested in non-duality. They start trying to drop personal pronouns. They don't use the word I anymore, as if somehow that's going to get them somewhere. And even beyond that, they might sort of jump on speakers who give talks on non-duality and accuse them of using the word I and me and so forth as if that mattered, which of course it doesn't. It kind of doesn't matter, but it is it's one of the, you could say it's one of the small ways in which culturally, you know, this kind of myth that there is an I, which is so powerful and so pervasive, is kept going. And one of the things I came across, I mean, I've written it a few times, I can't remember who I was quoting from, I wish I could, is that if you take the sentence, it is raining, you deconstruct that and you ask yourself, what's the it in it is raining? What's the thing that is raining? It clearly doesn't exist. In other words, the sentence, it is raining, actually means rain is falling. You know, there's rain which is falling. There isn't a separate thing, an it, which is causing the rain. And so the suggestion is it's the same in the sentence, say, I am happy. The word I in the sentence, I am happy, has the same force, which is none whatsoever, as the word it in the sentence, it is raining. You know, it is raining, rain is falling. I am happy, happiness is arising. There isn't a separate I that is feeling happy. There is just a feeling of happiness happening. Happiness happens. Rain falls. And there is neither the it that reigns nor the I that feels happiness. I'm not sure there's a lot that can be said about that other than it's very sticky. Once it emerges, and it doesn't emerge completely for everyone, but I think it does emerge completely for most of us. But once it emerges, it's extremely sticky. So it seems like, you know, everything becomes defined in relationship to this apparent I. So everything either belongs to me or it does not belong to me. You know, it's either, you know, familiar and almost a part of me, or it is alien and threatening to me. It's friendly to me or it's threatening to me. It's just a very, very sticky thing indeed. Yeah, Tony Parsons says this ruins your life, or what we thought was our life. It doesn't have to be a catastrophe, but it can be, in a way. I mean, for example, if like me, you were a very sincere, passionate spiritual seeker, and perhaps you got a lot of life's entertainment out of spiritual seeking, and perhaps your friends tended to be spiritual seeking, you hang out in communities or whatever, that can all be taken away, you know, through the seeing of this. There can just be a complete loss of interest in that. All the spiritual books suddenly go into the boot of the car and they're driven down to the charity shop. You know, I mean, there's all sorts of ways that life can radically change because of this. I mean, another example, I mean, I certainly have come across and know people whose relationships got into serious problems when, you know, this was seen. You know, for example, if there's a relationship which is held together partly or maybe largely through a shared enthusiasm for a spiritual path, or a particular guru or something like that, and then, you know, and then this is seen, and then so one of the people in that relationship just loses all interest in that. You know, they no longer see any point in holding satsangs for the guru and showing videos of the guru to a group of friends and so forth. I mean, if that was a large part of the glue holding that relationship together, the relationship might fall apart, which might be considered a catastrophe. It might not be. But this can certainly destroy a lot of what was of interest in life before, let's say, before the tiger seized us. If not now, when? There's only now. So again, it's very much part of the enlightenment story that paradise is in the future. Enlightenment is in the future. Whatever enlightenment it is, it's something that I know is in the future. I know I haven't got it, but of course I'm right about that because I can't get it. But somehow it's lingering there as a hope in the future. Well, it's extraordinary, as you know, one of the most obvious facts of existence is there is no future. Just as another of the most obvious facts of existence is there is no past. I mean, I'm choosing my words very carefully. There is no future. So paradise is now. When else could it be? There's only now. Everything is now. Everything that exists is now. Yes, indeed. Yes, I hope you die soon.